From the very beginning, Crystal McDowell's life was defined by hardship. Born to parents battling drug addiction, Crystal was tragically named after crystal meth, a stark reminder of the environment she was born into. Her early years were spent in a household where instability was the norm, as her parents struggled with substance abuse that eventually led to their untimely deaths. By the time Crystal was just 11 years old, both of her parents had passed away, succumbing to complications from AIDS, a disease they had contracted through their drug use. Within 6 months, Crystal lost both of the people who were supposed to guide her through life. However, the loss of her parents was only the beginning of Crystal's tragic early years. As a teenager, she endured one of the darkest experiences imaginable. She was abducted by a man who held her captive in a chicken coop, where she was sexually assaulted for several days. It was an event that could have broken anyone. Eventually, Crystal made her way to Baytown, Texas, where she found refuge with her aunt and uncle. Despite the horrific abuse she had suffered as a child and teenager, Crystal was determined to make a better life for herself. She sought to escape the shadows of her past and forge a new path, one that would lead to happiness and fulfillment. In Baytown, Crystal met Steve McDowell, a man who seemed like the answer to her prayers. Steve was charming, with a playful personality, a love for video games, fast cars, and an easygoing demeanor that quickly won Crystal over. Her friends noticed the change in her. Crystal seemed genuinely happy, as if she had finally found someone who could provide her with the stability and love she had longed for throughout her tumultuous life. The two quickly fell in love, and soon after, they were married. It seemed like the beginning of a fairy tale. Crystal, now working as a flight attendant for ExpressJet, had the opportunity to travel frequently, and she and Steve enjoyed many trips together, taking full advantage of her airline perks. In time, the couple welcomed 2 children into their lives, a son named Madden and a daughter named Maui. Crystal adored her children, and they became the center of her world. She was a dedicated mother, always putting the needs of her children first, ensuring that they were loved and cared for in every way. From the outside, it appeared that Crystal had finally achieved the life she had always dreamed of. She had a loving husband, 2 beautiful children, and a career that allowed her to provide for her family while enjoying the freedom of travel. But beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. After a decade of marriage, Crystal's relationship with Steve began to deteriorate. What had once been a happy, loving partnership was now filled with tension and dissatisfaction. Crystal, who had always been a strong, independent woman, started to feel trapped in her marriage. By 2017, Crystal had made the difficult decision to divorce Steve. It was not an easy choice. She knew that ending the marriage would be hard on their children, and she struggled with the emotional weight of the decision. But Crystal was determined to create a better future for herself and her kids. Steve, however, was not ready to let go. Despite their separation, he clung to the hope that they could reconcile. He didn't want the divorce, and he certainly didn't want to lose the life they had built together. The tension between them grew as Crystal prepared to move on with her life. Although they were officially divorced, Crystal and Steve continued to live together while she waited for her new home to be remodeled. It was a tense arrangement, with emotions running high as they navigated the complexities of their relationship and their impending permanent separation. Despite the challenges she faced at home, Crystal was focused on her future. At 37 years old, she was ready to reinvent herself, not just personally but professionally. She had left her job as a flight attendant and was now pursuing a career in real estate, a move that symbolized her desire to take control of her own destiny. Real estate was a fresh start for Crystal. It represented independence, financial stability, and the opportunity to build something for herself and her children. She was excited about the possibilities and looked forward to the new chapter that awaited her. In addition to her career, Crystal had also begun dating someone new, Paul Hargrave, a local jewelry store manager. Their relationship was still in its early stages, but it was clear that Paul cared for Crystal, and she seemed genuinely happy with him. It was a time of transformation for Crystal, as she worked to leave behind the pain of her past and embrace the future with optimism. But just as Crystal's life seemed to be taking a positive turn, tragedy struck. August 25, 2017, was supposed to be a normal day for Crystal. She had made plans to meet up with her family later that evening to watch the highly anticipated boxing match between Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor, a fight that had captivated millions of people around the world. But as the evening wore on, Crystal never showed up. At first, her family wasn't too concerned. Crystal was a busy woman, juggling her responsibilities as a mother, a new real estate agent, and someone still dealing with the complexities of her recent divorce. However, as the hours passed and Crystal failed to respond to texts and calls, her family's concern grew. By the following day, when no one had heard from her, they knew something was wrong. This wasn't like Crystal. She was always in contact with her loved ones, especially when she had plans to meet up with them. On August 26, 2017, Crystal's family made the difficult decision to contact the authorities and report her missing. When deputies from the Chambers County Sheriff's Department arrived at Crystal's home to begin their investigation, they immediately spoke with Steve McDowell. Steve, who had been divorced from Crystal for 6 months, was cooperative during the initial questioning. He explained that Crystal had begun dating someone new after their separation and suggested that perhaps she had simply gone off without telling anyone. However, something about Steve's demeanor seemed off. Despite their divorce, Steve was still wearing his wedding ring, a detail that raised the suspicions of the deputies. It was a small, seemingly insignificant thing, but it hinted at the possibility that Steve wasn't ready to let go of his marriage and that he might know more about Crystal's disappearance than he was letting on. Steve told investigators that he hadn't seen Crystal since she had left for a date the previous night. He claimed that there were nights when she would disappear without informing him of her whereabouts, implying that this might just be one of those times, but the detectives weren't convinced. As investigators delved deeper into Crystal's disappearance, they identified 2 main suspects, Steve McDowell and Paul Hargrave, Crystal's new boyfriend. Both men had been in contact with Crystal shortly before she disappeared, and both had their own potential motives. Paul Hargrave had been the last person to see Crystal alive. According to Paul, the two had spent the evening of August 24th together, and Crystal had left his home early the next morning, driving off in her black Mercedes. Paul even provided security camera footage that showed Crystal leaving his house at 7:35 a.m. on August 25th. Despite this, detectives couldn't rule Paul out as a suspect. He had been in a relationship with Crystal for only a short time, and investigators needed to ensure that there was no foul play involved on his part. But as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Steve McDowell was the one who warranted closer scrutiny. Steve's behavior continued to raise suspicions. Despite his claims of not knowing where Crystal had gone, detectives couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. And as they looked into his past, they uncovered disturbing details about his relationship with Crystal. As the investigation into Crystal's disappearance progressed, Steve McDowell's behavior continued to raise suspicions among the detectives. His calm demeanor, inconsistent statements, and the fact that he was still wearing his wedding ring despite their divorce all raised red flags. Detectives also noted his failure to display the kind of emotional concern one would expect from someone whose ex-wife had suddenly vanished. Steve's failure to pass a polygraph test only heightened the detectives' suspicions. Faced with mounting evidence, including security footage and testimony, Steve finally broke under the pressure. In a stunning confession, Steve admitted to killing Crystal. According to his account, the murder happened after a heated argument between the two. Crystal had told him that she no longer loved him and wanted to move on with her life. This revelation sparked a confrontation that quickly escalated out of control. Steve claimed that in a moment of intense anger and emotional turmoil, he suffocated Crystal. He insisted that it wasn't premeditated, that it had happened in the heat of the moment. But that didn't change the outcome. After realizing what he had done, Steve panicked and tried to cover up the crime. He wrapped Crystal's body in trash bags and placed it in the trunk of her black Mercedes. He then drove to a secluded area and dumped her body into a ravine, hoping that it would never be found. Despite his efforts to conceal the crime, Steve eventually led authorities to the location where he had disposed of Crystal's remains. The discovery of her body confirmed the worst fears of her family and brought the tragic case to a heartbreaking conclusion. Steve McDowell was arrested and charged with Crystal's murder, and his confession played a central role in the prosecution's case against him. As the detectives dug deeper into Crystal's life, they discovered that her marriage to Steve had been far from perfect. Behind the facade of a happy family, there had been tension, infidelity, and emotional turmoil.